One of the greatest strength and conditioning coaches, Winston Churchill, once said, "I no longer listen to what people say. I just watch what they do, because behavior never lies." From the moment you start as a strength and conditioning coach, a performance coach, till the day you walk away from this field, that is the main statement that you need to always remember. Because no matter what, you're going to have 1,000,001 athletes come up to you and tell you what they want, but they're obviously not willing to pay the price to get to that point. And what they want to do isn't always what they do. And you guys are all racking through your brain and you recognize that. Again, email me and I will get this over to you. So the presentation is, it is what it is until it ain't. Anybody here that is within that 1 to 5 year range, within the field, within the craft, it'll drive you absolutely insane if you're anything like I was. Because one day something is supposed to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, then the next day, don't ever do it. And it follows suit all the way through. And so one of the things I wanted you guys to see is, this is my treatise on 50 years of strength and conditioning, as John alluded to, and I'll walk you through this. Make sure, never ever, mustn't always, got to, have to. You have to do these. Eat 5 small meals per day and run. Also, eat only breakfast and dinner and walk. Also, eat lots of protein and lift. And don't even do any cardio. It's bad for your joints. Also, don't eat too much protein and make sure you're sleeping a lot. But don't be sedentary. But don't be too active. It's bad for your blood pressure. Make sure you replace all your lost salt, but never eat too much sodium. It's easy, just eat vegetables. Don't eat potatoes or corn. Fruit is obviously good for you, and it's also all sugar and is bad for you. Sugar, I forgot to mention, is a vital source of quick-burning carbohydrates that your brain needs to survive, and you should avoid it at all costs. Protein is hurting your kidneys. Make sure you eat a lot of it. Drink water. Never starve yourself unless you're calling it intermittent fasting. Don't overhydrate. Being a vegan is obviously the healthiest lifestyle. And also, no, it's not. Fish is obviously super good for you, and it's full of mercury and killing you. Lastly, coming from Florida, make sure you get some sun every day for vitamin D and a healthy dose of skin cancer. I don't claim credit for this, I didn't write it. And it also isn't my treatise. But what I want you to understand is, when I was growing up, this was a major thing for me. Anybody who knows me, as I'm a stickler for attention to details. Attention, attention, attention to details. And then I came across this. Don't sweat the small stuff. And that made sense to me too. Because anybody, if you're like me, you sweat the details, it can drive you absolutely insane. And so all of a sudden, this creates a little bit of balance. So which one is it? Don't sweat the small stuff, or make sure that you pay close attention to details. Well, truly, it's what resonates with you. Just like anything else, just like any fortune teller, they're going to find something that resonates with you and they're going to start walking you down that path. But it's your job is to have an emulsifier. As a good strength and conditioning coach, as an effective strength and conditioning coach, your job is to make sure that you have something to hold on to, whatever that might be. So what are you willing to grow? And on that same note, what are you willing to tolerate? And I'll get into the balance of that in just a brief moment. With what we do, everything is based off of this Penrose triangle, because we're looking for a number of things. And the basis behind this presentation is everything that you do as a strength and conditioning coach, and some of you guys heard me say this in the beginning, is everything should have some sort of superficial meaning, no matter what. So if a coach asks you, hey, why are you doing this with my players? If an athlete is struggling and goes, why am I doing this? You need to have an immediate answer. Immediate answer. It needs to be, boom, you're doing this because we need activation of this. We're doing this because we're stretching this. This is going to give you the neuromuscular padding for this. Plain and simple. But that's really the basis behind what we do as a strength and conditioning coach. But at some point in time, you've got to get into deeper Bs. And some of you guys were asking, we grade all of ours off of Charlie Bravo Alpha Action, which obviously is going to go into our outer core. And then at some point in time, if you're in the game long enough, and if you're fortunate enough, you're going to find some of these really, really superstar, unbelievably gifted ex-unicorns, which we can talk about later on. Another of the world's greatest strength and conditioning coaches. Absorb what is useful. Discard what is useless. And add what is specifically your own, by the great Bruce Lee. Keep in mind, these are very fluid terms. From athlete to athlete, from group to group, from situational situation, that could change. That could completely change. I could have wanted to say, guys, we're going to run the 3-cone L drill. It's the best exercise in the entire world, and it is going to lead to increased agility. But then I walk into here, and there's probably not a great situation for me to do so. So in that instance, that now greatest thing since sliced bread has become completely useless to me. So understand that you've got to be super fluid with that. For the most part, I think this has become very, very popular, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. If anybody is not familiar with it, please, by all means, do some research. But in a nutshell, it means you don't know shit. When you first start something, you really don't know. And to the point where not only do you not know, you overestimate how much you know. And it happens. Anybody remember that old show, Pros versus Joes? It was one of my favorite shows, coming from this field. Because you would take these high-end, top-end Olympic athletes, and then you would partner up with the rest of us, average Joes. And it was always funny because they would interview them prior to, and they would say, hey, how are you going to do against Michael Phelps? They're like, oh, I think I can stand a chance. And then what happens? You put them in the water, and it is mind-blowing just how terrible you are against somebody who is a unicorn. Now, we take advantage of this. You can't hide from this. But we use it to create mirror moments. A mirror moment is anything that really just slaps them in the face and brings them back to reality. No matter what it is. Everybody here might say, I have the perfect ready position. I'm like, oh yeah, really? Let's check it out. And what did you guys find out? You may have had a great ready position to start with, but what happens in the second quarter? What happens in the fourth quarter? What happens on a double reverse? Now all of a sudden your amazing ready position is no longer amazing. So we use these as opportunities to create a more realistic baseline. Everything we do with coaching, we give them a broader expectation. And that's my coaching cue. My job is to say, hey, turn your toe in just a little bit. Push your butt back a little bit. On this exercise, this is what we're looking for. Whatever it is. And it's your job is to then be, we're going to mentor you to raise your level of self-expectation. It's one of the most difficult things that we're finding with a lot of our young athletes is getting them to expect more from themselves. But it's not impossible. If we just tell them what we expect from them, and then we teach them how to get there, it doesn't take very much to just micrometer closer and closer and closer to that goal. And then the last piece of the puzzle is we want them, because the greatest thing that you could ever teach an athlete is how to be a better teammate. And in that instance, we want to teach them how to hold others to a higher standard. A good friend of mine trains downrange dogs out in Florida, and he came up with this amazing analogy for me, and it was unbelievable because sometimes this takes a bad knock because some people get offended when you compare dogs to children and dogs to athletes. But if you just take a second and let that flow off your shoulders for a second, you'll start to understand how a lot of our athletes work. Our Charlie is, we want the athlete to be obedient, just like you want a dog to be obedient. If a dog is going to bite somebody, you want to be able to say stop, and the dog stops. You're like, okay, that's good, I'm okay. Which means the athlete becomes a little bit more coachable. But our next level is we want them to be well-behaved. We want them to be able to make those own choices on their own. We want them to be able to say, hey, I'm not going to do that. Or this is what I should be doing. I know I'm supposed to be eating what Rob Wolf told me. I know I'm supposed to be sleeping this. I know I'm supposed to be hydrating that. Doing what they're supposed to be doing. But Mike told me that the ultimate, his unicorn dogs are the ones that he can get that recognize, hey, here's a big old T-bone steak, but I need you to run over here and do these 3 jobs. And he says it's very rare. It's very rare for one of his canines to be able to do that. But he knows that he's got something special. And it's no different than what we do with our athletes. If I know I've got an athlete, because what do we always talk about? Athletes aren't sleeping enough, partying like rock stars. They're on social media. They're addicted to social media. So how can I get an athlete to start to understand, sacrifice that good feeling of being on social media, because you know that you've got to get 8 hours of sleep. And that's kind of the holy grail of what we're trying to do. Now, to dive in deeper, this is what we call our pipeline performance standards. Whenever we started to evaluate athletes, this is what we looked at. We wanted to figure out what we consider your performance envelope, that sweet spot. Because as a strength and conditioning coach, when I was young, everything was about huge numbers. Get these guys, our coach demanded that they get their squat up, get their bench up. What's their incline? We did incline and we did cleans, hang cleans. What are their numbers? But one of the things that I quickly found that I show the coach, I said, oftentimes none of these really correlated to better on-field performance. And I was lucky because my coach bought into it. He said, well, if it's not that, what is it? And we started to develop this, our pipeline performance standards, which means the very first one is the superficial presence. How big, how fast, how strong are they? That is going to determine a lot about how somebody performs. It will, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say don't get their numbers up, but at what point in time? When I first started, it was 2.5 times your body weight to start plyometrics. And that was the dogma. But then I started to realize that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because I watch kids run, I watch them play, I watch sprinters running full speed down a track and recognize that's the greatest plyometric exercise ever. And none of my sprinters can squat 2.5 times their body weight. And so I started to look at what are we truly chasing? How much time and how much effort are we going down the rabbit hole to accomplish presence? Because some of those obviously can't be changed. You're either 6'6" or you're not 6'6", correct? You're either blessed with speed or you're slow. So then he said, what else is there? He said, obviously intelligence, IQ. And we're talking about game intelligence. Now, in the practical, what did I stress? Find your team. This could be anything, because what we ended up doing was using this as the same standard we use to evaluate my coaches. I started to do the exact same thing with this, which we can get into in just a bit. Professionalism, your presence. How well is your ability to increase your presence, to develop yourself, to raise your standard, to go above and beyond, to improve what you are naturally blessed with? And this was the hard one for a lot of coaches to understand. And oh, can you see it? Sorry. It was EQ, emotional quotient, which is your emotional intelligence. It's one of those very, very rare instances where you start to understand knowing yourself and knowing how to navigate the landscape of being on a team will be the higher dictator towards success as the team than anything else. Anything else. When I played here, I'm right up the road, we used to play Converse Judson every year. And I used to always be amazed because they never truly had any of these big, my senior year, we had 13 of us signed D1 scholarships. We had a true just track team out there, and Converse Judson had none, 0. And my senior year, I think they rolled us like 63-10. And it always amazed me when I looked at that is how could a group like that defeat just true talent? And it's because of that emotional quotient. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is 3 stories. And I've tried to figure out the order of these stories to give you a better understanding of how we develop this. Everything works, nothing works, and this is a lesson in order, chaos, and dependability. That's Justin. Justin came to us from a North school when we were in Tampa, and he was a hothead. I get a call from a judge. A judge calls me and says, hey, you've been recommended according to these channels. We've got a kid here who has served extensive jail time. He's a student at the university, and he just got arrested again for being under the influence, and he ended up getting in a fight. So he goes to jail, and they said he's either going to go to jail, but if you're willing to take him on, get him out of that environment, we're going to stay that. And so his dad and Justin call me up. He's got some chronic knee issues, chronic shoulder problems. And we set him up with a city job. And I said, you're going to come in here and you're going to train with all of our athletes. And we're going to get you squared away and hopefully get you to stay out of trouble. And so what we started to do is understand a little bit about the balancing, the science, and the anecdotes of strength and conditioning. So just like you guys saw, my superficial is isolate, integrate, and then incorporate everything that we do into some sort of skill acquisition. He was a safety. He was one of those old school safeties that just human spear and just completely missile you. Well, what Ronnie said comes into play here. Another one of the greatest lessons I ever learned that I took to heart is, it's not what you say, but what they hear. Because we're bringing a lot of baggage as athletes to you as a coach. And so what you tell me, you're intending something to hear. But what I'm hearing could be my father, my perfectionist father, always screaming at me, telling me I'm not good enough. You don't know that, but that's what you have to deal with. And oftentimes what you find is there's certain rules. How many of you guys heard you always got to talk positive? Always got to talk positive, always got to uplift. And to the most part, that is 100% true. And one day, I'm taking Justin through his workouts, and he ends up doing a lift, and I go, hey, that's good job, Justin, good job. And he looks over at me and he goes, no, the fuck it wasn't. And I look at him and I go, he's right. He's right. His dad was very patronizing and condescending to him. And that's what I just did to him. So in that instance of me saying, yeah, good job, you're awesome, sometimes you'll get athletes that know it wasn't awesome. I didn't get deep enough on my squat. It was a terrible catch on my clean. But what do? Great job. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. And sometimes they know that. And so what we say isn't always what they hear. Sometimes it can come across as very disingenuous. But time under the watch will let you figure that out. It'll let you get more experience in how to do that. How well will the culture that helped you build, grow them as an athlete and a person? To finish the story about Justin Justin, we throw into the middle of all of our workouts with all of our pros. We give him small leadership roles. We start getting him to lead some of the high school kids when he's off, and he just starts developing and growing and growing. Put your arm around him, give him a little bit of love, just like Ronnie said, and next thing, he reports, does a great job stabilizing his knee, does a great job stabilizing his shoulder. His coach calls me and says he is a model athlete. A model athlete. So much that they voted him team captain. Was about to get kicked off, and now he's the team captain. Game 1 goes through, he does amazing. Game 2 goes through, he does amazing. Game 3 goes through, amazing. To the point where now all of a sudden, a couple of scouts in the NFL are calling. Hey, how's his work ethic? I heard you did a great job with this program. Is it true? Absolutely. The guy's unbelievable. 4th game of the year. Running down on kickoff. He's already had an amazing game. Open the second half. Boom! Hits the ground. Doesn't move. Paralyzed. Turns out they bring a helicopter. They life flight him. Goes to the hospital. A couple days go by, and I get a call. It's his mom. His mom is next to his bedside with the doctor. Subdermal hematoma, massive swelling in the brain. So much that he's now blind. He can barely talk, and he has long-term memory loss. And his mom said, he's forgotten everything, except for one thing. He remembers working out with you. And it crushed me. It chilled me to the bone. And he said, we need to hold on to that. So every day on my lunch break, I would get on the phone, and they would put the phone next to him during his therapy. And I would just talk. I reached out to Justin, and I said, Justin, for the first time ever in my life, I'm going to publicly talk about you and the impact you had on my life. And he gave me his permission. I said, is there anything you want to say? And he said, very short letter. I love you. You saved my life. And there isn't a day goes by that I don't drink a beer to you. And it's those moments that I never realized attention to detail. That the smallest matters could make the biggest impact that I never knew were ever going to exist. This is him 16 years later. He's regained his speech. He has obviously can see, but with some significant corrective lenses. And he's held a full-time job. So I hold him very, very dear to my heart. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. To understand that within that chaos, exactly that Ingrid has been talking about, is sometimes it takes some pretty devastating moments to be able to figure that out. Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes. This is what we developed with our PIPE, presence, intelligence, quotient, professionalism, and our EQ. Every one of our workout cards has the workout, specifically detailing the exercise, what we're trying to accomplish, because I want my staff to relay that to them. I want my athletes to be educated up. I want them to understand why they're doing what they're doing. But the important part, the deep portion, is that we're going to create something that creates a mirror moment for them to figure out, say today we're going to work on a sense of urgency, motion, and energy. I'm going to create a situation so bleak for you that it's going to be very difficult to display a sense of urgency. Maybe like doing machine gun steps and running a fast 7 on your Frogger shuttle? How many of you guys, when it got towards the end, that the sense of urgency completely disappeared? And it happens. Everybody will break. But my job is to expose you to that. My job is to let you know that you're doing it, and then maybe mentor you to figure out how we can change that. Stop for a second, take a breather, and then tack it full speed instead of maintaining 50%. That would be a great way to develop a sense of urgency. I can email that to you whenever. My second story, beaches, healthy rebellion and balance. This is the late great Jimmy Williams, boxing Hall of Fame coach, and this is Melissa Vanderhall, one of my volleyball athletes. There will always be troughs and crests. And Jimmy, when we started working with Tarver years ago in preparation for Roy Jones, used to always tell me, if you can't fight when you're tired, you can't fight. All these guys come out there and they show this display of skill until they're tired, until they've done 30 seconds of machine gun steps and decide to do a quick Frogger shuttle, and their ready stance is terrible and their speed is terrible. And so exactly what Winston Churchill said is, if you can't fight when you're tired, you can't fight. But the other part of that, because Jimmy has worked with boxers, I think he died, he was 94, and he started training when he was 23. He used to train, he was in the corner with the Brown Bomber, for those of you old boxers. You won't last long if you can't manage successes. From a superficial as well as a deep meaning, which means oftentimes whenever we have an abundance of something, we always have a tendency to make stupid mistakes. How many times do we have, oh, I'm an hour early. So next thing you know, you're like, oh, I'll go get some coffee. And then I'll go stop over here. And next thing you know, you're 5 minutes late. It happens all the time. Does that ever happen with money? Like, woo, I got all this money burning a hole in my pocket, and so I know I'm going to make good decisions with it. No, absolutely not. That's my superficial. This right here, if you guys remember anything about how to develop athletes from a psychomotor standpoint, is B. Number 1, become comfortable with failing. The dogma right now is no failure, never fail. I'm not a failure, because we as alphas want to say, oh, I never fail. I always get the job done. But it significantly limits your ability to improve. Because if you get comfortable with failing, you start to reduce anxiety. The higher up the tiers you go, it may not mean a lot to a little kid, but the higher up, the more dialed in, the scarier the situation, this becomes very important, because less anxiety leads to less fear. Less fear. And anybody who has a lot of fear will succumb to debilitation. You could have the best athletes in the world who have the quickest reactions, who are amazing, stable, and balanced. But how many times do they fail to pull the trigger on a good decision? All the time. All the time. All walks of life. And so if you reduce this debilitation, it comes full circle and you start to increase courage. Increasing courage creates greater opportunities to become comfortable with failing. Comes back around. And this builds a healthy rebellion. And in the end, if I could take an individual athlete and create a healthy rebellion, I can sleep soundly because I know I've done my job. Now, what do we mean by healthy rebellion? Sometimes, superficially, it just means not listening to the negative self-talk in your own head, being that rebellious. And sometimes, my tactical athletes will know, sometimes, pardon my French, it just means say fuck it. I'll do it, whatever. I mean, I'll have some athletes in certain situations like Melissa who we could have some hellacious workouts. Be like, hey, listen, we're going to run 30 suicides. 1-to-1 work-to-rest ratio. And she developed what I call a healthy rebellion. She'd be like, everybody else would be like, dang it. Oh, come on. Can we do something else? She'd be like, fuck it, let's go. And she would get on the line and she would be the first person off. And it pulled everybody else with her. And just having that influence, having her ability to develop that healthy rebellion and that influence was a huge factor in us winning a national championship. The choices that you make when your confidence is either super high or has been punched in the gut is a foundational pillar in sustained improvements. A couple of guys I was talking to earlier at the other break, sometimes, especially when it's really easy to pick out the guys coming through the pipeline, going special operations, guys that run well, guys that swim well, guys who could do push-ups and pull-ups for days. But what happens the first time that they fail? Some of these guys are so gifted that they don't know how to deal with failing. And they ring the bell. Ring the bell. Quit. That's why they always say the pit bulls always make it through, because of that resilience. They failed. They know how to say, fuck it, whatever. Hey, you didn't pass. All right, well, line up. Let me do it again. Versus that stallion who all of a sudden has never dealt with failure. His confidence is crushed, and thus he's going to be debilitated, and he's going to decrease his level of courage. And we know that the moment you decrease your level of courage to applied task, you're not bringing your best. And in certain situations, if you don't bring your best, you're obviously not going to do well in that. One of the greatest strength and conditioning coaches in the world, Bill Gates, once said, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. As a strength and conditioning coach, one of the things that I want to get off to you guys is understand, play the long game. Play the long game. It's hard because you may have an athlete for one off season. You may have an athlete for a couple of weeks. Hey, can you just do an evaluation on me? That's okay. Don't ruin that experience because you just want to play the short game. Play the long game. Make sure that you understand the 10-year plan. For us in Raider, people are always like, how are you training Raider? My job is literally to pass Raider off as a 18-year-old to an awesome strength and conditioning coach wherever he decides to play college. And I want that strength and conditioning coach to be like, wow, this kid's well coached. Well coached. He's not maxed out. I just want him to be well coached. Which brings us to the Kaizen's health and performance, interweaving levels of purposeful training to grow a lifelong cycle of constant improvement measured against a rising standard. That is very, very important, is constant improvement. We have to change the culture with our young athletes and getting them to understand, I'm not comparing my bench to yours. I want you to get 1% better today. I want to try to get 1% better, and I'm going to hold you on the X, you're going to hold me on the X, and at some point in time, we're going to be absolutely amazing as a team. Absolutely amazing. Now, antecedent. That program is designed off of our kids program, our youth program, is how can we get the kids to do what we need them to do, like Raider, my son Raider, so that at some point in time, when he eventually gets to A2, is arena. And we're talking about middle school, high school, college age athletes. And so the groundwork, and the reason why I share this with you is if you're working with young kids, exactly what I said is that's my job, is to make sure that he's prepared to play some sort of sport, whatever it is, whatever his little heart desires. Now, we throw in the third one because of the population we work with, and we call that Aries. It's our warfighters. That's our hero program where we're working with highly effective rescue operators, fire department, anybody whose performance isn't based off of a scoreboard. And so now we have to start to dial in a little bit more. We have to change some variables. We have to change how we coach. Things get a little bit more serious, but it's still the same exact thing, because what do we know? A lot of these guys are what? They used to play something. They played baseball, lacrosse, they swam, whatever. Now this is the interesting part. We struggle with this for a long time. I don't know if you can read that, it's blood red. That's our alpha program. And it's not what you think. Our alpha program is moms and dads. Moms and dads. Because sometimes we don't really get to choose. When I watch Raider overreact to dumb stuff the same way I would, I start to realize, crap, he's going to raise his son in the same exact form and fashion. And so now I've got to change the way that I approach this. And so, this is a common thread that a lot of people have reached out to me. How do you do balance, Raider, and the rest? And that's it, is I understand that if I am doing my job and I neglect taking care of myself, that's what Raider's going to do. That's what Zia's going to do. That's what your athletes are going to do, because they don't listen to what you say as much as what you do. And it sounds so stupid, but we truly are the alphas, because, not because we're big, not because we're fast, not because we're strong, but because we have all the betas watching us, watching your every move. And so my athletes, if I sit there and I see something that I don't like and how I address that, like I listen to Raider. Raider's been around me a long time, 8 years now, and he listens. He still repeats coaching cues that I use with the Olympic swim team. And so sometimes I'm like, okay, Raider, calm down, because you're using that with your fellow kids. You can't call them a numbnut. You know, you just, I go, soften that edge a little bit, buddy. You know, I said that to Ryan Lochte, but you can't say that to, you know, your friend Jimmy. So in this instance, he reacts the same exact way as I react. So understand that this is how it comes full circle, is alpha to antecedent. They're going to do the same things you do. I'm not trying to brag, but Zia is kicking a bag now. She's 14, 15 months old, and so we go to the gym, and that's what she does. She walks over, and she's like, oh, she sees a bag, and she's like, and she's kicking, and then she'll punch it. And she just laughs about it. And it's an amazing, amazing experience that we're having, watching her watch the alphas above her. You know, she makes the noise. She sits there and grabs dumbbells, and she's literally a year old. Now, this ASAP program, to bring it around, is, number one, we're looking for accentuated skills acquisition programming. My advice to you as a strength and conditioning coach, and to tap onto what Ronnie said, is go to coaches and find out what they're teaching. Find out, go to practices, listen to coaching cues. Listen to how a safety is supposed to backpedal in their system. Listen to the basketball coaches talk about how they want them to slide. Listen to a volleyball coach say, oh, to get over faster, do a crossover step. Because maybe the whole time you were always teaching this. Maybe you played and you're like, oh, in volleyball, you really got to, keep it square. But now all of a sudden they may have developed a new system that requires more ground coverage. And so now all of a sudden they've got to do this big crossover. But you don't know that because you've never been to practice. And so that instance, go to practice. Listen not to podcasts. Also listen to podcasts about strength and conditioning, but listen to a podcast on quarterback IQ. Listen to what they're talking about. Listen to a receivers coach talk about this is what we're looking for. Because what was a common thing that Tex and Luke have been talking about with like the speed ladder? Because it's really hot, and it has been super hot lately, is what? Guys are like, And then you'll watch these films of guys going into their breaks and they're like, and then they'll take off. But what does every wide receiver coach tell you? The ball has already been thrown, numbnut. You're over there dancing and our quarterback is sacked. And that's the difference of listening to a specific sport coach say, in 3 steps, the ball is being launched. And now all of a sudden you go, crap, that means we can't sit here and do this. Because maybe a DB coach has told them, when the arms come flailing, what does that mean? That means they're going in the opposite direction. It's tried and true. So all of a sudden you can sit there and be like, hey, I'm going to teach my guys to cut and then don't flail my arms, because now that's a dead giveaway to a DB. But I only know that because I've listened to DB coaches talk about it. They know that cue. They go, you're backpedaling, you're watching that receiver, and he does the big arm flail. If he's going an inside bend, that means he's running to the outside. You watch 99 films, 99 times it's going to happen. And so now, because I know that, I'm going to get my receivers to keep those elbows in tight and tucked. This is our unicorn. ASAP also for us means artificially self-applied pressure. It's one of the hardest things for us to develop in our young athletes. Because what is that pressure? It also means discomfort. And how many young athletes, and I need to clarify this verbiage, young athletes doesn't mean age, does it? Because I'll tell you what, I've been very fortunate to be in this game for a long time to understand that I have Olympic gold medalists that act like children. I have NFL, all-pro, so-and-so, they act in the same response. I could tell one of my NFL guys, hey guys, we're gonna stride out 30-meter flies. I'm like, did you just pout like a child? Shut up. I'm like, okay. So then in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we need to figure out how to talk to this athlete, because maybe somewhere down the line, he got stuck in that. So again, it's not just young from a age, but it's also young from a development standpoint. My third and final, a dancing fighter's dilemma. This is Mary and her beautiful daughter, Lauren. This is a lesson in coordination, pattern, rhythm, and reliability. Mary was a professional dancer, ballerina, and she came to me because she was having some problems, knee problems. And so we worked through some of those. Very intelligent dancer, very engaged. She asked a ton of questions. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Well, Raph, I'm always supposed to be, I can't do it, but you're always supposed to be turned out in whatever that position is. And she goes, if I'm always supposed to be there, why are we doing so much internal rotation? And it sharpened me, because I had to figure out, you know what, you're right. Maybe we don't need to be doing that. Or the reason why we're doing that is because this, or this. One of the rare known facts is anybody who knew Mary didn't know that she was also a pugilist. She loved boxing. Sweet little Mary. So we used to sit there and pay-per-view order the fights, and we would watch boxing. And from all of that, we started to recognize that strength and conditioning is about patterning. It's about rhythm. It's about, what do we talk about with our Kadire killers? Manipulating that variable. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But it also means not just developing extension, but finding a rhythm of flexion and extension, finding a rhythm of medial and lateral, finding a rhythm of superior and inferior. And so what we started to do, the more I started to train her, was to recognize that 99.9% of all my athletes pretty much should train the same way. The only thing that really changed was the mindset of how you applied a program to somebody, of how you said, hey, listen, we had guys trying out for Major League Baseball, and they were like, hey, I'm having climbing the ladder. I can't jump really high to snag some of these well-hit balls right across, and they're falling in front of the outfielder. And they're like, hey, I need to be a little bit quicker. I need to be, and all of those me and my staff, we took a look at all those, and I said, that's the same thing our basketball players are saying. That's the same thing our gymnasts are saying. That's the same thing our football players are saying. That's the same thing that our war fighters were saying. We need to move better, period. And because it was really interesting, the dogma was, hey, don't train like a gymnast because it'll make you small. And I believed that for the longest time. And then I realized gymnastics didn't make you small. Out of 100 little girls in gymnastics, the only ones who stuck around are the ones who never grew. And so to me, I was like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. And so a lesson in coordination, pattern, rhythm, and rhyming, she was instrumental in me developing the comprehensive nature of our training system. We started categorizing everything. We started writing everything down. We started to take the human body and literally mapping out as much as we can and figuring out how we could develop it all. And she would, like clockwork, come in 4 to 5 times a week, every single time, and brought her A game. Now that meant movement. Strategic organizational use of praxis emphasizes the need for a constant cycle of conceptualizing the meanings of what can be learned from experiences in order to reframe strategic and operational models. In a nutshell, what did you do and how can you apply it to the next problem? The next problem. The problem is I've got to jump. How can I get there? I've got to jump over the speaker. I got to jump over the speaker and land without killing myself. So all of the tools that I've exposed myself to, how am I going to take that and computationally figure out how to do that without dying? Situational. Adaptation towards skill acquisition. And this is the part that scares me. Epigenetic. Because how she reacts as an alpha of her family, her beta kids. And so, Miss Mary, over time, we got super busy. We started to take on more teams, more clients, more athletes. That 5 days a week became 4 days a week. Hey, Mary, we can't train you at that time. Let's put off, we used to call them labs. Let's put off these labs and let's do, can you come in instead of Wednesday, let's do Thursday. Okay, I can't do Thursday. And you can see where that was going. And I remember one day, and to the point where we had whittled her down pretty far. And so her purpose, we removed something that she was near and dear to. She was highly engaged with what we were trying to accomplish in developing this program. We isolated her because we removed her from the gym because we really didn't have a place for her anymore. And the worst off is what? She lost her outlet. She lost that physical outlet to sweat, to exert herself, to normalize brain chemistry. And I remember one day I canceled on her, and she was, you could see she was visibly upset. It boiled down, and she was really, really uncomfortable. And she wouldn't talk to me, and she just kind of stormed out and left. And within 3 months, she committed suicide. And that was one of the hardest things for me, because I knew the answers. I knew with what had to happen to help somebody if I recognized that person was going through a tough time. We see guys coming out transitional in the military, and we know, here's our checklist. Let's get them in a community. Let's immediately give them a purpose. And wholeheartedly, let's get them on a schedule and a routine that allows them some sort of exertion so they could level off. But I was stupid. I failed to recognize that in Mary. And so I talk to Lauren all the time, just to make sure that she understands that she always has a place with us, to make sure that she doesn't make that same decision. And so I bring up that morbid story because we never realize the consequences of those actions, as minor as they might be. As selfish as my actions were, and not in a mean and malicious way, but because I wanted to help more people. But sometimes we kind of forget. Sometimes you kind of leave to the wayside some of these other people. And she used to love the strength and conditioning coach, Eddie Vedder. I was around 9 when the babysitter snuck Who's Next, The Who, onto the turntable. The parents were gone, the windows shook, the shelves were rattling, rock and roll, and that began an exploration into music that had soul, rebellion, aggression, and affection. And to me, that's the rhythm of everything, is finding the mechanical rhythm of music and figuring out how to express yourself, whatever that might be. So whether you're a dancer, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a rock star, we need to be cognizant of how these athletes are expressing themselves. Anybody with young children will recognize they've got a weird way of expressing themselves. And sometimes it's annoying to us. Our athletes sometimes have a weird way of expressing themselves. And sometimes it's annoying to us. But we have to figure out truly what they're saying. Sometimes it's a call for help. Sometimes they're just weird. And I'm fine with that. And we have to accept them in all their weirdness. In the end, it boils down to this. As a strength and conditioning coach, your psychomotor drive. How well, another way we also like to say it, our basketball coach loves this, is your physicality. How physical are you under duress? How physical are you against a challenge? Your physicality. Which means balancing the team between the psychology of discomfort. And that's not always bad. That is a driver. That is something that is going to inherently push an athlete. You have to be the safety net. You want to make sure that the athlete is there to experience discomfort, but they don't turn it off completely and say, this is crap, I'm walking away. You figure out, okay, let's woo-saw, let's pay your earlobes, let's take a big deep breath, and let's attack this again. You'll be fine. The anatomy of motivation, figuring out, and everybody here is different. Everybody here can figure out how you like to be motivated. I'm personally not a hoorah-rah guy. And I personally don't like somebody blowing sunshine up my butt when I know I don't do it well. Some of you guys are just like that. And so it runs into that situation where sometimes you have to figure out that maybe you are inhibiting an athlete because of dogma, because you're sitting there clapping it up all the time. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying know your audience. Build habits. In the end, it's always funny to me where coaches want to micromanage, but they fail to understand that the athlete has to play the game. And so in certain instances, if we don't prepare the athlete to play that game, we are falling very, very short of that preparation portion, which means we can't dive and drive for them. We can't come out there and fix their elbows and, okay, come back, pass your butt, tuck your chin, do all of those. At some point in time, they've got to make that choice. They've got to cerebrally be involved and engaged, and hopefully if they do it long enough, it's habitual. But it comes back down to what are we willing to grow and what are we willing to tolerate? How many of us will preach that sitting here, but now all of a sudden, when we're doing our go fast on the mat, how many of you guys allowed crap? How many of you guys allowed the weeds to flourish versus taking a big step back? Okay, what did Tex say in his drill? Okay, punch and hammer. So I'm going to punch and hammer, check. But all of a sudden, when things get a little dicey, what do we allow to tolerate? What are we allowing that athlete to do that may not be exactly what they need to do to develop these habits? And then obviously the human movement sciences. That is how you get a hold of me. Raph at Kaizen HP, Health and Performance. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook, as well as on the Twitter.